Hi, everyone, and welcome to Geek Out on Cloud Volumes Service for AWS. It is a lovely, balmy April morning. I don't know where this year has gone at all. So happy Easter, everybody. This is our first Geek Out on Zoom, which is our new web platform. So I do apologize in advance for any technical difficulties that we may have. But I am joined by two very smart people today, so we should be able to solve any of those. How many engineers does it take to solve a WebEx problem? So if just a couple of little admin things as we start, we'll be going through till for another 45 minutes. If you've got any questions at any point, you can drop them into the chat. There is a little chat button if you don't have the chat box open. Feel free to send your questions through, and we'll get through to as many of them as we can. And any that we don't, we'll reach out to you afterwards. So yeah, and there's always prizes for good questions. So do feel free to send them in. Let's jump to the next slide. So I'm joined today by two very, very geeky guys from the Australia team, or the APAC team. On the left, we have Ricky Martin, and on the right, Simon Hallowell. So Ricky, tell me a little bit about who are you, what do you do, and how our Geek Out attendees can get in touch with you.
So what do? I joke that I try to do as little as possible. These days, I seem to spend most of my time traveling to various places around Asia, talking to people about what they'd like to be doing, not just over the next year or two, but like sort of looking sort of 3 to 5 years down the track as to what their data management strategy should be and how they move to cloud and how they take advantage of microservices and that sort of stuff. It's actually a really cool job because I get to talk a lot about futures as well as how do you set up foundations for building that future pretty much now. So yeah, that's what I do. I talk a lot for a living, which is good.
That's cool. I will keep you on task for today. And Simon, what do you do? And yeah, a bit more about you.
Okay, so I'm a program manager at NetApp. That means I do a little bit of everything. Primarily, I guess the most relevant thing for this conversation is I spend a lot of time putting together demos and content to make it easy for folks like Ricky to get out and do the talking that he does well.
Awesome. And don't let those ties and those headshots fool you guys. These are two of our very technical, very hands-on. They always love to ask tricky technical questions and then go demo it themselves. So yeah, definitely if you've got techie questions, throw them in as well. Okay, so Ricky, what you're going around APAC talking to customers and partners and even non-customers. What are some of the trends and what's kind of interesting out there at the moment, particularly around cloud?
I think the interesting thing, well, part of the interesting thing is that the meetings that I'm having now and the workshops that I'm having now, as opposed to say 2-3 years ago when I would go and have meetings with people with titles like storage architect or head of infrastructure or things like that, most of the people that I'm talking to now have names like DevOps engineers or cloud architect or completely different kinds of job roles. And it's really interesting that the conversations that I'm having now is far less about how do I make my infrastructure more reliable and cheaper, is now about how do I help my developers and the business get the results they need more quickly. It's kind of, George Kurian sort of said it a couple of times, which is speed is the new scale. And that makes life really interesting because like the other day I was at a large customer and I sort of started talking about the NetApp Kubernetes service, which we won't be talking about today, but which is also really, really cool. And I think that it actually bent a couple of people's heads out of shape that were used to NetApp being a storage vendor, because they're going, hang on, why are you talking about Kubernetes orchestration? You're a storage vendor. And it's like, no, we're not a storage vendor. We are a data management vendor. We're a cloud vendor. And I think that that's the exciting thing from my perspective, is that the IT's emphasis, or at least our view of IT's, IT has changed from just being about keeping the lights on to making a real difference and doing turning data into a better business decision and a better customer outcome. And that's, you know, partly where things like what we're doing with CVS comes in really handy, because it is about speed to outcomes rather than speeds and feeds.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I mean, Simon, you've also been at NetApp for quite a few years. So how do you see kind of that, you know, in your tenure here, like, has it been the changing conversations that you're also having?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pace of change at the moment is huge. Ricky sort of nailed most of what I'm seeing with our customers, but the pace of change is really overwhelming at times. The number of new services that the cloud vendors are putting out there is, it can, you know, if we talk about the speed to getting into the cloud, you're at risk of sort of analysis paralysis at times if trying to figure out which is the right tool to get the job done. So having folks getting out there like Ricky and doing sessions like this really help our customers understand which are the services that are best placed to help them and continue that speed.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the things that, you know, I'm going to be covering. Well, Ricky's going to be going through the demo of one of our services today, which I think is really exciting, that we are showing, you know, we want to be able to show everything that's actually out there and fully functional, as opposed to maybe some of the people who are saying, well, promises that maybe aren't always met because people don't have the time to really go and evaluate everything. So we're hoping by showing you can say, hey, look, I've seen it working and I know it actually works as advertised. So that's kind of one of the cool things about Geek Out, and we will absolutely be allocating a huge chunk of time of this to the demo. I guess that's a good segue into, you know, what is Cloud Volumes Service for AWS, or on this slide it doesn't mention for AWS. So Ricky, can you tell me a little bit about, you know, what is NetApp's Cloud Volumes Service for the hyperscalers?
Sure. So the Cloud Volumes Service is what NetApp has always been sort of kind of famous for, like boiled down into something that you can just consume via whatever native cloud interface you want to use. So back sort of say 20 years ago, NetApp was fast, simple, reliable. It was NFS. It was basically you wheeled in a box, you gave it an IP address, and you started serving data. And it was literally, you could get up and going with a NetApp filer, you know, inside of 20 minutes, which was kind of unheard of back then. This is similar in many respects, in as much that unlike the full ONTAP experience you get with Cloud Volumes ONTAP or NetApp, you know, private storage or things like that, this brings down the core things that people quite often thought of as being a NetApp thing, which was the NAS bit, and makes it stupidly easy to consume. It's also really super fast in terms of speeds and feeds, because sometimes speeds and feeds do help you get what you're trying to get done quickly, more quickly. So you can deploy pretty much any workload you want on top of it. There are some that aren't as good on NFS as they are with local block, but for the most part, we're seeing for some workloads 3 times the performance of native block storage for that cloud provider. So we're talking about comparing that to EBS IO1 SSDs. And we provide that at 1/3 the price. So when quite often you're bringing workloads in, especially on-premises workloads, things which aren't cloud native applications, they're kind of built with an assumption about performance and feature sets and things like that, you know, they were built around inside the data center ecosystem. When you bring those into cloud, sometimes they just don't work quite as well as you might expect. And that you sometimes have to spend a bit of time figuring out, will it work on this? Do I need to like carve up sort of 4 or 5 instances and pick the one that actually performs the way I want it to? This allows you to be like a default landing zone for pretty much any workload which requires any level of performance. So we're talking Oracle databases, MySQL databases, file sharing even, just good old traditional file shares. And even though there are some things which we say are definitely ticked off approved use cases, from my way of thinking, it's really just a good idea to say, you know, I'm going to use this by default. And if it doesn't work there, then I will find something rather else, because 80% of the time it's going to be both faster and cheaper and more convenient to use cloud services, the NetApp Cloud services, than it is to try and figure out what, how to get the native cloud sort of storage options working, especially if you're thinking about multi-cloud. Because the nice thing is that the performance characteristics and ease of use is the same on each of the major hyperscalers. So as you start looking at going, I want to be able to deploy this application or this service in any cloud, having one data management and storage capability, which is pretty much the same across all of them, gives you that ability to have a multi-cloud experience far more easily.
So you made a couple of really good points there. So I just wanted to touch on one of those that really resonated was, you know, you said, well, what NetApp was really good at when we founded the company was saying, here's one appliance you can get up and running in basically no time at all. And I was thinking, yeah, there's a really nice thing about the appliance model of not having to worry too much about the internals, about how it's all cabled together and how it's connected, a single cable to your environment, or two cables for redundancy. What are some of the ways that Cloud Volumes Service can help customers, while it is that appliance model of you don't need to worry about how it runs underneath, but what are some of the ways that they can also be flexible with Cloud Volumes Service? You know, what if they land into a Cloud Volume that is not the right, maybe not the right kind of performance for their workload?
Well, this is where the other kind of cool thing about like doing the same thing 20 years later is that a lot of the features and functions that we've implemented over those 20 years, perhaps most importantly being all flash, and the second one being quality of service, allows you to and being completely software defined. I mean, I know that term does get abused a little bit, but if you don't like the way the system is performing, if it's not big enough or it's too big or the performance isn't right, rather than having to sit there and migrate the data to another physical pool of storage, you just change the properties of it and you say, I want this to be 100 gigabytes or 100 terabytes or 50 terabytes. You make that change and it happens instantaneously. I want this to be an extreme level of performance or a standard level of performance or a so-so level of performance. You can do that just by going a couple of clicks on the GUI, or more importantly, as you move into automation and sort of the high levels of, you know, operational maturity, you do this all via APIs. In fact, ideally, you want all of this done by APIs. Then this can become a first-class infrastructure as code, like citizen. And so again, it's like that core value proposition of simple, fast, reliable that we have from 20 years ago, plus all the stuff that we've developed since then to make this good enough to handle pretty much any workload and working with, you know, a DevOps environment. It's pretty much, you know, fast, cheap, and good. You know, pick all three. Awesome.
So I would like to know, you mentioned multi-cloud as well. So we're specifically talking about AWS in this one, and that's because it's available in the Sydney region, which is where I'm based. And so I wanted to talk about AWS first, but you said it's the same service across the three major hyperscale public cloud providers. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Maybe can we have a look at what it looks like in those environments? Is it like a NetApp?
Oh, sorry, I kind of missed out the fact that when we talk about use cases is that and talking about doing this on all three clouds, we actually have customers that are doing that already. And when I talked about the speeds and feeds, this is an example of doing things that were previously impossible inside of 45 minutes, and that was on Cloud Volumes for AWS. So it's not just, you know, we talk about this stuff, it's actually being done by clients. But just to give an indication, this service is so good that Microsoft decided to make it the foundation for their unstructured data storage as a service, their, you know, Azure NetApp files. And this is what it looks like. It's actually a first party thing. So you don't buy it separately. It's actually from Microsoft. It has a little bit of NetApp branding in there because we're awesome. No, it's because it gives people that assurance that it is enterprise class. And there are some slight differences in exactly what things are supported on each of the different clouds. So, for example, on AWS, we have the Active Directory integration, we have the NFS, we have SIFs, SMB, and a whole bunch of other things. In Azure NetApp Files, there's slight difference in the set of services, but for the core things, which was like the NFS and SMB stuff, the performance characteristics, the ease of use, and all the rest of this stuff is pretty much the same. Likewise.
Sorry, just jumping in there. I mean, this is a great screen to end on, to kind of hold on as well, is saying, well, this is the Azure GUI, right? This is an integrated. So if you're familiar with Azure, you don't need to learn a new NetApp system manager or system cloud manager or whatever it's part of that integrated kind of environment. That's really nice.
Yeah, it is. It's just another thing that works exactly the same way you would expect it to work on Azure, and it looks and smells and feels like a Microsoft service because it is. Integrated with their billing, absolutely everything. And you can even, if you happen to have, if Microsoft's happen to have thrown a whole bunch of Azure credits at you, you can spend them on Azure NetApp Files. Likewise, we have a similar kind of integration with Google. The rollout into the Google data centers is more limited than it is certainly with AWS and to a certain extent with Azure. There's only a few US data centers that have this already, but in a lot of cases, those Google data centers are also where a lot of their other, like leading edge services and, GPUs and machine learning and TensorFlow and all the rest of that stuff is. And the nice thing about cloud is it shouldn't really matter where you actually have the service. If you want to run this in GCP, all you have to do is send an email off. For the moment, what we do is we white glove this. That means we whitelist it, we sit there, we set it up, and we go through the process of setting you up. I think it takes a couple of hours once we've verified the fact that it's a good use case and that you're not going to get yourself into trouble. So it's.
So I wanted to say as well, you talk to a lot of customers across across the globe, but primarily in this APAC region. But do you see much adoption? Like you mentioned, things like having tensor clause and the right kind of services available in the US. Is that really stopping adoption of cloud services that they're not available in region?
No and yes. So it doesn't stop it for the experimental parts of the business, the people that are doing the genuine, like let's move fast and break things. The move fast and break things cloud don't really care where it is. That's, as you remember, most people, there was a whole bunch of people using AWS in Australia well before there were AWS data centers here. So the people, in the innovators and the early adopters part of the innovation adoption curve, they're fine with it. The people who tend to want to have this in country are the people who tend to be on the kind of the early majority to late majority phase of people who want to see something in country, who have concerns perhaps about data locality and data custodianship and stuff like that. So for certain cluster users, it's not a problem at all. For others, it is. But I think that for the kinds of things which we're talking about, again, if you're talking about machine learning and TensorFlow and graphics code processing and a whole bunch of other cool stuff like that, it's not really a barrier at all. So again, and by the time people get past that within their own maturity, you'll probably find a lot of this stuff will be rolled out to the other data centers because, like Simon said earlier on, the rate at which the cloud providers are implementing new services and rolling them out across the globe into all their regions is truly mind-boggling. I mean, literally billions of dollars per quarter is being spent doing this. The scale is astounding.
And so what's available in Australia now? So we've seen kind of the Azure interface, the GCP interface, and you're about to demo to us the AWS interface. What's available in Australia right now? So
the Amazon interface is generally available. That is just, you can go through, hop into the AWS marketplace, select it, click a few buttons, answer a few questions, and away you go. Maybe I might be oversimplifying that, Simon, but that's certainly been my experience and sort of what I've seen when it's gone through. I'm pretty sure that we've actually got it available in Azure, although there might be a whitelisting service for that. And GCP is not available in Australia yet. And because it's actually something that Google needs to roll out, I'm not really at liberty to talk about timeframes for when that will be available in ANZ.
Sure. Okay. And the one other question from our audience was just around encryption. So I think that's a really good point you mentioned about early adopters don't really, like you said, what did you say? They move fast and break things. I like that kind of visual. I know plenty of those people. But really, you know, when it starts to move into more enterprise workloads, production work, primary workloads, encryption is really a big question, and security. So kind of how do we address that with Cloud Volumes Service?
So everything which is stored at rest is encrypted. You kind of just have to do that if you want to have a multi-tenanted service. There is also an ability to encrypt the data in flight. Some of that is partly done through things like Kerberized NFS, or using the encrypted capabilities within SMB1 and even SMB2 and even SMB1. So you can make sure the system is secure end to end. Now, a proper conversation about security and encryption that goes beyond security theatre and checklists isn't something we really have time to do now. But if that respondent, or indeed anybody else, wants to have a deep conversation about that, we would welcome that. And please just get in contact with us, and we'll go through what part of this is security theatre and what part of this is absolute requirements that you need to be able to make sure that you'll feel safe to be protected against. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that sounds very fair. And I think some of the things that do take time in security and compliance are things like SOC 2 and so on. I know that they're underway, but because we're releasing at a rate of knots or hundreds of knots, it's a matter of just getting them aligned with getting those certifications and those compliance reports done while we're still releasing new products.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, all that. So I would love to be in that product team looking at their Kanban board and going, oh my gosh, here's all the be doing next.
Oh, Phoebe, you're
okay, so
too much punishment. Oh God.
So yeah, I would love to see it. So I think everybody is kind of really happy about what we've talked about. So let's dive into the demo, and then I'll give you the next kind of to run through a typical demo.
Yeah. Speaking of moving fast and breaking things, I think
you've broken something.
No, I'm trying to find the correct.
So while you do that, Simon, are there some demos that you see are really resonating with customers, with partners on things like AWS Summit booths?
Yeah, I think so. Part of what I do is also work with our service design team and talk with customers about how they can run as a service provider for internal services as well as public service provider. And so the API demo that we have, and Ricky will show you some of that, is really resonating with customers who want to provide self-service so that their IT folks and their developers can focus on the big things rather than the day-to-day management. And I don't think it can be understated how powerful having that API is, and then not having to worry about the day-to-day management. The other thing I just wanted to quickly throw in is we were talking a little bit about security, and we're already in a position with Cloud Volumes where we can talk to customers about GDPR compliance. We're technically a data processor, and so Cloud Volumes is applicable with GDPR, and we can help with HIPAA compliance as well for that sort of security.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah,
so
really
hopefully you can see the you can see the actual demo screen up and running, which looks very similar to the last slide that I had, which is a good thing, really. So this is what the AWS interface looks like. Unlike Azure and GCP, it's not integrated directly into the AWS console, which we would love to do, but AWS sort of tends to try to keep that stuff sort of fairly close to its chest. So this is actually part of the Green Cloud acquisition that we did, and it's actually pretty awesome. So this is just showing the storage thing. On the left-hand side, we can see volumes, snapshots, something for doing Active Directory, and a way of synchronizing data into that, into the Cloud Volumes using another product called Cloud Sync, which I will touch on briefly later on today. But when you use this with Cloud Volumes, the Cloud Sync capability of getting stuff into and out of the Cloud Volumes is free. So if I'm just going to go directly into, there's already a volume called Demo Volume, which has been set up. So I'm just going to click into that. And this is where you can go through and change a bunch of different things, like what its name is, any tags that you might have for auditing purposes or reporting purposes or things like that. What I'm going to do here is currently the allocated capacity for this is 50 gigabytes in size. So I'm just going to make that 500 gigabytes. Now this is going to take all of about 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Haha, it didn't make a liar of me. So as you can see, we've just gone through and increased the size of that volume by a factor of 10, and it took 3 seconds. And that's because everything is software defined. All we had to do to make that work was have fun with pointers and do a little bit of accounting arithmetic. And that just goes through.
You would consider that fun, Ricky. Fun with pointers.
Well, look, if fun is relative. I mean, when you consider, like, in the old days, back when I was a lad, going through and increasing the size of a volume from 50 gigabytes to 500 gigabytes involved carving up a whole bunch of new RAID groups, setting them out with an LVM, and then waiting hours while the file system relayed itself back out again and hoped that you didn't actually make a mistake in the entire process and accidentally blew away a production volume. So yeah, the relative pain of that is very low. And if it was like, well, let's say that you didn't really need 500 gigabytes, because one of the things about Cloud Volumes is you pay for this by capacity, by storage tier per month. Now, it's usually probably a pretty good idea to not over allocate things up front. Now, I'd be really happy if everybody who went and bought Cloud Volumes went and sort of provisioned 5 terabytes to 20 terabytes to, well, let's call it 100 terabytes straight up front and paid for that. But that's not the way you should do this. The idea is that you can go through, you can make it a certain size, or indeed we can shrink it back down again and say, I didn't really need 500. That was just the DBAs doing their usual, I need 4 times as much space as I normally do so that I can keep on running dump database to disk device into that. And I'm just going to say, nope, you only get 200 gigabytes. And again, hopefully in about 3 seconds, that will come back and say that it's done, okay? The other thing that we can do here is we can change the performance level. So the default service level is one we call premium. Now, I think that I've got this on one of my other slides. I won't go through all the speeds and feeds, but basically the premium versus standard versus extreme is done based on a an IOPS per terabyte or a throughput per terabyte basis. So that typically speaking, the more you allocate to this, the faster it gets, but the average data density or performance density stays the same within the service level that you've got. So rather than asking people to define this in terms of, gigabytes per second or IOPS per second or things like that, you get standard, premium, or extreme. These extreme is very, very, very fast indeed. We're talking, if you have, like, say 20 terabytes, you're talking gigabytes per second worth of throughput. It is very, very, very fast. Certainly a lot faster than anything else you're likely to find as a storage service outside of some very sort of esoteric configurations, and certainly nothing as easy to deploy as this. And you can go through and you can make that standard, which is certainly better than SATA, or make it extreme. I'm going to make that extreme because extreme performance sounds like fun. It's kind of like insane mode on a Tesla. Look, there's some other stuff there, things like reserved for snapshots. I would just leave that at 0. That's just a way of hiding a certain amount of capacity from your users so that you can guarantee that nobody's going to eat into the snapshot space. That's kind of more for our old school NetApp folks who are used to doing that stuff. Just keep things easy. I'd leave that at 0. Go through and change those things. Now, the other thing which is kind of really cool is, let's try again, is you'll probably notice up here, if you've been looking, that number up there has been changing. And what that is, that's kind of a list of everything that we've done. So you'll notice that up here, I've got the fact that I've updated my volume sizes. There's a bunch of other stuff around creating Active Directory and things like that. That's kind of a little hard to see here. So hopefully, if I click on, come on, be good for me. Sorry, the speed's just a little slower than I would like at the moment. Show all notifications.
Doing demos live. We
all
know.
Well, this is me also sort of going from a hotel in Singapore to a bunch of servers sitting in California and then back to Australia via WebEx. So we'll get there any second now. This is not lab on demand. So this is not CVS speed. This is just my hotel internet speed. Any second now. Come on, be good to me. Oh, there we go. Okay, just took a little while for it to catch up. So this goes through and shows that same list of things in more detail. So there's all the notifications, Active Directory settings, snapshot volumes were created, all the rest of this stuff. I'm now going to go through and mark all of those as being red, and that little thing there has gone to go to grey. Now, I've never seen this, but I'm told that if that ever goes to yellow or red, that's something you need to take notice of because something has failed. I've never actually seen anything that's failed. Simon, have you ever seen that go to red or orange or yellow?
I haven't, thankfully.
So anyway, let's kind of head back. Now, the other thing I like about this is I'm just going to hit there and hit the back button on my browser. Yay, I can use standard browser keys, which is kind of cool because, you know, I hated the old like web applications where, oh no, don't hit the back key on the browser because it'll just break everything. This is a full HTML5 interface. It works and behaves the way it should. Now, the other thing I'm going to do, for those of you who are familiar with NetApp, you'll know that we just love snapshots. Back in the day when I first joined NetApp, you actually had to pass your how to demonstrate snapshots and put it onto a whiteboard exam before you're allowed to go and talk to customers. But that's because snapshots are really, really cool. As soon as this comes up here. So you'll see there are a couple of snapshots already in here, one of which looks like it was automatically created, another one of which got a new name. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new snapshot, right? And this is how quickly it can occur. What's the volume that I want, right? The one called demo volume. And what I'm going to call it, we always give you a name if you don't want to come up with things. You know, I think it was Andreas and said there are only two hard things in IT: cache coherency and naming things. So I'll show you a little bit about that. Just call this demo snap, daemon snap. And
it's actually one of the things I do like about you know, a lot of the cloud services out there do provide either automated names or UUIDs, so I don't need to worry about thinking about what to call it anymore.
So, and that snapshot was indeed instantaneous. It was a snapshot. So we've made effectively an entire copy of that entire 200 gigabyte volume in less than a second. And that comes in really, really handy for DevOps workflows. It comes in really, really handy for pretty much any kind of workflow where you want to make sure you have a backup before you go on to your next step, which is pretty much any major change at all. If you rely upon old school methods, yep.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and say this because I've had this conversation with a couple of people at NetApp. NetApp has had this love of snapshots for a very long time. How would you describe snapshots to somebody who hasn't worked with NetApp for a very long time?
It's an instant copy of
Putting
your
you on the
data.
spot there.
Yeah, no, it's an instant copy of your data. The thing is, people make copies of data for a whole variety of reasons. In fact, typically, any person has, for any given piece of data, probably at least 5 to 10 copies of that data, be it on backups for backup security, because they've loaned that out to someone or other else so that they can make modifications, because it was in the wrong directory and they just saved it into another directory for long-term archiving, a whole bunch of things. People make copies all the time. It's probably the most single biggest use case for data management is making copies of things. In fact, I asked a large retailer at one point in time that their core data is probably something in the vicinity of about, 100 gigabytes. That's enough information to store all the information about every purchase from every customer in every supermarket in Australia over a year. About 100 gigabytes. Really not that much. This retailer had close to a petabyte of our data, and I sort of said, what's consuming the rest of it? And he said, copies of archives of backups of pictures of cats. Now, wouldn't it be great if instead of actually making copies, you just had a virtual copy and you did things with it? And again, this comes back to that whole idea of being software defined, of being able to do things instantaneously. Making copies of stuff can significantly accelerate workflows, from instantiating new dev test environments, standing up developer work environments. It's the kind of thing that ING used in order to truly create that DevOps sort of nirvana, where production was just one more instance of dev test. Right? That's what snapshots allow you to do, because you can make bajillions of these things. Well, okay, call it hundreds. Hundreds is probably more manageable than bajillions of these things instantaneously, and build those into automation workflows. But the other really cool things about snapshots isn't just that you can make backups, it's the fact that restoring them is really super fast. So here's this one which I've called Demo Snap. I want to go through and I'm going to restore this to a volume. So I'm actually going to create a new volume for this, just because I also want to show you how you can create a new volume. My name is going to be Demo Restore. Come on, be nice to me. Demo Restore. You see here is a volume path. Again, this is kind of automatically created for you. A tenacious, supercalifragilistic, and that's, man, could you ever actually explain that to somebody over the phone? I'm just going to hit the refresh button. Elegant, ubiquitous, no, it's loquacious, zen, ishizaka. I like that one. So basically, this is the volume path that will appear in an NFS mount, so that you can sit there and say, in your mount tab, that's what will appear. If you want to, you can change that to something boring, but I kind of like that. For example, I could change that to...
I much like that, better than Demo Restore.
something boring. Okay. Service level, premium. Again, I'll leave it at that. Reserved for snapshots, I'll leave that at 0. A terabyte is the default allocated capacity. I'll just drop that down to be 100 gigabytes. You can shrink that down to any value as long as it is larger than the actual amount of data which is sitting inside the volume, right? Or you can make it up to 100 terabytes if that's what you want to do. Please do, because I like to buy premium ice cream, and that will help me do so. Security style, I've got 2 security styles here, which in this particular case is stuck to Unix because it came from a Unix-based snapshot. But I also have NTFS if I want to run native SMB, and I've also got a shared one, or a mixed mode one, which allows you to map Windows users to Unix users to make it easy for you to go through and share the same data amongst both of those kinds of people. And that comes in really handy, strangely enough, for AI, because what we see is a lot of people end up using things like I'll remember this in a second. Jupyter notebooks on Windows machines or Mac machines, and they typically mount the resulting like stores for their data using SMB. And yet the training things, you know, like your GPUs and stuff like that, which are typically running like Linux, you know, 1604 or sort of something like that, like usually a fairly old version of Linux so that TensorFlow and the NVIDIA drivers are happy. That can go through and access that via NFS. So having this shared ability to have both Windows and Unix access the stuff at the same time is quite useful. My next thing here, my add export policy rule. Allowing anybody read and write access is probably a little open. And if I wanted to, I could go through and change that to just whatever my current mount point is. I'm guessing here 172. Come on, be nice to me. Sorry, this is just, again, network lag between here and the US causing this. This is not something you would normally see in production class. Anyway, so I can go through, change the allowed clients to a specific subnet, and then make that read or write only. For the moment, I'll just drop that out because it's misbehaving it slightly. Any second now.
The joys of being live.
Oh yeah, the joys of network access. Come on. Ah, there we go. Whoa. Anyway, so I then hit that, and I believe, unless I'm very much mistaken, if I go back to my volumes, I should see, no, it didn't work. I just go through and do that without changing the thing. So back into demo snap. Restore to volume.
This is why APIs are so great, in my opinion. We don't have a GUI to contend with.
That's very true.
Yeah,
And
we
these
should
all
let you do your. We should have let you do your API one.
I mean, very quick.
Yeah, that's the whole point to DevOps, man. Okay, we're just going to hit there. I go allocated posture, leave everything else, and I just hit create volume. Okay. And so I've gone through and recovered that data like that quickly. Okay. This is how, and you can see over here it's sitting there doing the creating piece. This will probably take about another 5 seconds or so, but this is a full copy of what might be hundreds or tens of terabytes or even 100 terabytes worth of data in almost no time at all. And again, especially when you push this into automation workflows with DevOps and APIs and things like this, this can significantly accelerate your time to market. It's also a great way of recovering from a crypto locker, all your data is mine, I will break your life ransomware thing. There is at least one
that we hope you never hit.
Well, I know of one organization that actually no longer bothers to update their virus checkers aggressively because they know that if they do get hit with a crypto locker style thing, all they need to do is go back to the previous snapshot, and they take snapshots every 10 minutes. So at worst, they sit there and go, oh, well, that's a shame. When did the thing hit? Then. Okay, what is it? It's this one. We'll update our virus checker. We'll go back to that 10-minute thing. Nobody will ever know the difference. And while I'm not suggesting that is a good way of managing things, sometimes that's the kind of stuff that having a snapshot will allow you to do. It allows you a lot more wiggle room in other areas inside your process. So yeah, keep your virus checkers up to date, guys. But yeah.
We have very little time left. So I just wanted to quickly cover a question around what are the three, or what are the service levels that are available, and what are the differences in performance, or how do we find out more information about those? Okay, so do I have them here? Bear with me while I go back and I share this. Share, ta-da! Okay. So you should now be seeing the performance levels that we have. Standard, 10 cents per gigabyte per month. That is 1,000 IOPS per terabyte. When we call an IO, it's a 16K IO.
which works out to 16 megabytes of throughput per terabyte. Pretty much standard, 4,000 IOs or 64 megabytes per throughput per terabyte, or indeed at 1,000 IOs. So if we're talking 128 megabytes per terabyte, you drop in 10 terabytes, we're now talking about 1.2 gigabytes per second. You put in 50 terabytes, you're talking northwards of 5 gigabytes per second. That's usually more than fast enough for pretty much anything you're likely to use. The latency that we typically see is under 2 milliseconds. The actual storage latency is under a half a millisecond. Most of the rest of that is just coming up through the network stack, which I will come back. That's what the network stack looks like in AWS, I'm pretty sure. Is that right, Phoebe?
Yes, sure is. So
yep.
Can we just jump to the resources page? And there's more information that's available on cloud.netapp.com, which is the NetApp Cloud central homepage. And so all those links are in this deck that'll be available, and also links to the performance benchmarks that Ricky was talking about, and also the link to try it yourself if you do want to give it a go. There is an active marketplace. You hit the subscribe button, you go through a couple of steps and sign up. Yep. Finally, I'm over time already, so let's move on. And just a couple of reminders for those of you interested in finding out more. We have one more slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
We will be at Google Cloud Next on the 9th to the 11th of April, which is actually this month. So we will be there at Google Cloud Next demonstrating our integration with the Google Cloud Platform, and a couple of other really cool things. We'll also be at AWS Summit in Sydney at the ICC on the 30th of April to the 2nd of May. Do come down. We'll have some special guests from our team in the United States coming over to visit. So do come say hi. I will be there as well. We have NetApp user groups in every state and or territory in Australia and also in New Zealand. Have a look on meetup.com for your NetApp user group if you'd like to see a demo of some of our live systems, our live services. There will be another Geek Out next month. More information to come. If you're on the mailing list, you will get a notification. If you're not on the mailing list, do sign up via Twitter or LinkedIn when those ads come out or when those posts come out. And finally, if there's any feedback, send it through. My name is Phoebe Go, and my email address is phoebe.go@netapp.com. So you can send it through to me. I believe